Jonathan Clark's seemingly perfect life shatters when he discovers that his girlfriend, Emily, has been hiding a devastating secret. When her affair with a mysterious man named Adam is revealed, Jonathan is left reeling with betrayal. But the truth goes deeper. Emily is being blackmailed by Adam, and her past is darker than Jonathan ever imagined. As Jonathan grapples with the truth, he must decide whether to confront the man who holds Emily's future in his hands, or walk away from the woman he once loved. The stakes are higher than ever, and nothing is as it seems. Will Jonathan find the strength to move on, or is it too late? It's the spring of 2023 in Chicago, a city known for its towering skyline, brutal winters, and a deep love for its sports teams. But underneath the surface of this vibrant city, life for some is anything but perfect. Meet Jonathan Clark, a 34-year-old graphic designer who's spent the last decade carving out a career that finally feels like it's heading in the right direction. He's the kind of guy who seems to have it all: a stable job, a beautiful apartment in the heart of the city, and a relationship with a woman who, on the outside, seems like the perfect match. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Jonathan's girlfriend, Emily, is everything he could have dreamed of. She's intelligent, ambitious, and gorgeous, a woman who's made a name for herself in the competitive world of digital marketing. They met 5 years ago at a mutual friends party, and what started as a casual conversation quickly turned into a whirlwind romance. Emily is the type of woman who lights up every room she enters, and for Jonathan, being with her felt like hitting the jackpot. They complement each other perfectly. Her extroverted energy balances his more laid-back, introverted nature. They've built a life together in their cozy apartment, filled with shared interests, late-night talks, and weekend getaways. Or so Jonathan thought. On the surface, everything seems ideal. But the cracks are starting to show, and Jonathan's about to discover just how deep they run. It's a Tuesday afternoon when Jonathan first notices something unusual. He's sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen, when his phone buzzes a message from Emily. "Running late, we'll be home by 7. Jonathan, never one to question her busy schedule, replies with a quick thumbs-up emoji and returns to his work. But in the back of his mind, a small seed of doubt begins to sprout. It's nothing major, just the smallest flicker of unease. They've had their fair share of late nights, sure, but tonight feels different. Later that evening, as he waits for her to come home, Jonathan flips through the channels, absent-mindedly watching whatever happens to be on. The clock ticks past 7, then 8, and by 9, he starts pacing. The longer he waits, the more his mind begins to race. What could be taking her so long? She had texted. She'd said she'd be home by 7, but here they are, 2 hours later, and still no word. Jonathan's stomach tightens. He tries calling, but it goes straight to voicemail. A growing sense of dread starts creeping over him, making his hands shake. He knows he's probably overthinking it. He's done that before. But as the minutes pass and the unease only grows, he can't help but feel like something's off. Finally, just after 10, the sound of the front door clicking open snaps Jonathan out of his thoughts. Emily steps in, her face flushed, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for something. She's wearing the same work outfit she left in this morning, but there's something different about her demeanor. She's not acting like herself. "Hey, you're late," Jonathan says, his voice a little sharper than he intends. He tries to mask the worry with a half smile. Emily forces a smile in return, but it doesn't quite reach her eyes. "I know. Sorry about that. I ran into traffic, and then I got caught up talking to a client." She sets her bag down, still avoiding his gaze. Jonathan nods, but he can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. He watches her move around the apartment, her actions a little too hurried, a little too tense. She's acting like she's trying to avoid something, and it's starting to rub him the wrong way. "You okay?" he asks, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily pauses, her back to him as she opens the fridge. "Yeah, just tired," she replies, her voice flat. It's a response that's too quick, too rehearsed. Jonathan can tell she's hiding something. His mind flashes back to the earlier moments of the day. Her text, the delay, the way she couldn't meet his eyes when she walked in. It's all adding up to something that feels off. "I've been worried," Jonathan admits, walking closer to her. You didn't answer your phone, I was just wondering where you were. Emily freezes, then turns around with a forced laugh. You really are such a worrywart, Jonathan, she says, her tone light but with an edge to it. You know how crazy my work is. Jonathan watches her, studying her face. He wants to believe her. He does. But there's this nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach that he can't shake. He opens his mouth to say something, but then stops himself. What's the point? She's not going to admit anything. Not now, not tonight. Not when she's already brushed him off so easily. But deep down, Jonathan knows that tonight is different. He can feel it in his bones. The next few days pass in a blur of routine. Emily's late a couple more times, each time offering a variation of the same excuse. Client meetings ran late, or I was caught up with a project. Jonathan starts to question if it's just him being paranoid, but the little things begin to add up. The way Emily's phone vibrates with notifications that she quickly silences. The way she's become more distant, more distracted. The sudden late nights at work that seem to coincide with her new client projects, and that nagging feeling in his gut that won't go away. One evening, Jonathan decides he's had enough. As Emily leaves for yet another late meeting, he quietly follows her, his heart pounding in his chest. He tells himself it's just for peace of mind, that he's just being cautious. But as he watches her slip into a sleek black car, driven by a man he doesn't recognize, the truth starts to hit him like a freight train. This isn't just work. This is something else. Jonathan couldn't believe what he'd just seen. His Emily, had just gotten into a car with a man he didn't recognize, and his heart sank into his stomach. For a moment, he stood frozen in place, watching the car disappear around the corner. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Was she really seeing someone else? Had all his suspicions been true all along? The rational part of him wanted to brush it off. It could be nothing. Maybe the guy was just a colleague or some new business associate she hadn't mentioned, but the gnawing feeling in his gut, the one that had been there for weeks now, told him otherwise. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. That night, Jonathan did what he'd never thought he'd have to do. He dug through Emily's things. The thought felt foreign to him, invasive even. They had always trusted each other. They had always been open. But trust, he realized, had a funny way of dissolving when betrayal looms in the background. Jonathan wasn't sure what he was looking for, but as he sifted through her things, his fingers brushed against her phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. His heart raced, and before he could talk himself out of it, he picked it up. The screen was locked, but Jonathan wasn't an idiot. He knew her passcode. They had shared everything, or so he thought. With shaky fingers, he typed it in. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. Dozens of messages, texts, photos, and even a few voice notes, all exchanged between Emily and a man named Adam. The last message, sent just hours ago, was the most damning. I'll see you tonight. Can't wait to be with you. Jonathan stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. He could hardly breathe, the weight of what he was seeing sinking in like a stone. The worst part, Emily had never once mentioned Adam. Not once in their entire relationship. And here he was, in these private messages, making plans to meet her. His mind raced. Had this been going on for months? Years? The thought of it made his blood boil. He set the phone down, trying to calm his racing heart. The apartment felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. He couldn't bring himself to confront her right away. Not yet. He needed time to think, to process everything. But one thing was clear. Emily had been hiding something from him, and he was determined to find out exactly what that was. The next few days were a blur of confusion and anger. Jonathan's mind was consumed with thoughts of Emily and Adam. Every time she came home, her smile seemed to get faker, her explanations more rehearsed. She kept up the same story: late meetings, client calls. But the more she said it, the less Jonathan believed it. Something had shifted between them, and he knew it. But Emily. She had no idea what was coming. The tension between them grew unbearable. Every conversation felt forced, every touch seemed like a lie. Jonathan found himself retreating into himself, withdrawn and distant, barely able to look her in the eye. It was like they were living in two different worlds, hers full of secrets and lies, and his filled with confusion and growing distrust. Finally, one evening, Jonathan couldn't take it anymore. He had to confront her. He had to know the truth. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. He had spent days rehearsing this moment, building up the courage to finally ask the questions that had been eating away at him. Emily, who had been pacing the living room, stopped and looked at him. There was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "What's up, babe?" she asked, her voice too casual. "Everything okay?" Jonathan clenched his fists at his sides, trying to control the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He couldn't back down now, not after everything he'd uncovered. "No, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "Everything is not okay. I saw you with him. Who is Adam?" Emily froze. Her face drained of color, and for a split second, Jonathan could see the panic in her eyes. She quickly regained composure, but the damage had already been done. "Adam? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice rising slightly. "You're being ridiculous. There's nothing going on with Adam." Jonathan didn't believe her. He wasn't going to buy the lies anymore. He took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm, as he pulled her phone from his pocket and showed her the messages. "Do you want to explain this then?" he asked, his tone laced with disappointment. Emily looked at the phone, her eyes widening with realization. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. I... Emily's voice faltered, and for a moment, Jonathan saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. But it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him this time. "Who is he, Emily?" Jonathan asked again, his voice low and cold. Emily hesitated, then looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The truth was finally spilling out, and there was no way to hide from it. "His name is Adam," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been seeing each other for the past few months. I never meant for it to happen, Jonathan. But it did." Jonathan felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. His hands trembled as he took a step back, trying to process what she had just said. For a moment, he couldn't speak. What was there to say? All the trust they had built, all the memories they had shared. It was all gone, shattered in an instant. "I can't believe this," Jonathan finally managed, his voice tight with emotion. "You've been lying to me this whole time behind my back?" "I never wanted to hurt you," Emily said, her voice cracking. "I was stupid. I got caught up in the excitement, but I swear, it's over. Adam means nothing. You're the one I want, Jonathan. I was just confused." Jonathan stared at her, his heart heavy with betrayal. The woman he had trusted with everything had just torn that trust apart. The words she said, "I was confused," meant nothing to him. There was no excuse for what she had done. As the silence lingered, Jonathan's mind started racing. What did he do now? He couldn't just forgive her. He couldn't just pretend it didn't happen. Something had broken between them, and there was no putting it back together. For the next few days, the apartment felt like a battlefield. Jonathan couldn't bring himself to look at Emily without seeing the lies. Every conversation felt like a reminder of her betrayal. He started withdrawing further, spending more time at work, avoiding her at all costs. The relationship, once filled with warmth and laughter, had turned cold and tense, but despite the tension, there was one thing Jonathan couldn't shake. The feeling that Emily was still hiding something. The way she looked at him sometimes, guilt mixed with something darker, told him there was more to the story. It wasn't just Adam. There was something bigger at play, and Jonathan was determined to find out what it was. Understood. I will get started on this portion of the script. I'll continue the build-up towards the climax, focusing on the rising tension, character dynamics, and pivotal moments. This section will maintain the conversational tone while intensifying the story's momentum. I'll ensure it fits the style you've requested. Once I finish 3,000 words, I'll inform you that I'm ready to move on to the fourth step. Let's dive in. Let's continue the journey with Jonathan and Emily. The days after Emily's confession passed like a blur, but for Jonathan, each moment felt like a slow march toward a breaking point. His mind was spinning, grappling with the shock of Emily's betrayal. And even though he had heard her words, "I want you, Jonathan," I was just confused. They felt hollow. The damage had been done, and no matter how much she apologized, he couldn't erase the image of her with Adam. The lies, and the secrecy. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship had crumbled, and now Jonathan was left to pick up the pieces. But the more Jonathan thought about it, the more something gnawed at him. Emily's confession, while shocking, didn't add up. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him, it was the fact that something felt off. She had acted too casual, too rehearsed in her explanations. She seemed more concerned with justifying herself than actually acknowledging the hurt she had caused. There was something bigger here, something deeper. And then, one night, Jonathan found what he was looking for. After another tense evening at home, Emily had gone out again. This time, a client dinner she claimed was necessary for her work. Jonathan, no longer able to stand being in the same room with her without feeling that knot in his chest, decided to do what he had been avoiding for weeks: dig deeper. He went into the bedroom, where Emily's purse lay carelessly on the bed. As he rifled through it, hoping to find something, anything, that would give him more clarity, his hand brushed against a small folded envelope. His breath hitched. Was this it? Was this the piece of the puzzle he had been missing? Jonathan opened the envelope slowly, his fingers trembling. Inside was a note, handwritten in a delicate script. The words sent a chill down his spine. "Meet me tonight at 8. We have unfinished business, I'll be waiting for you." The note was signed, Adam. Jonathan's stomach twisted, and for a moment, he didn't know whether to scream, throw the note across the room, or just collapse. His mind was racing, but one thought echoed louder than the rest. This wasn't just an affair. Emily wasn't just confused, she was hiding something much bigger. That night, Jonathan didn't sleep. The hours stretched out before him as he stewed in the knowledge that his world was falling apart. He had to confront her. He had to know the truth. When Emily came home, it was after midnight, and Jonathan was already awake, waiting. She walked in, as nonchalant as ever, but the look in her eyes faltered when she saw Jonathan sitting on the couch, holding the note. "I found this," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He held up the note, watching her face for any sign of guilt. Emily's face paled, her hand instinctively reaching for the note, but Jonathan held it out of her grasp. "What's this, Emily?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Who is Adam, really?" Her eyes darted around the room, and for a second, Jonathan thought she might lie again. But then, something shifted. A crack appeared in her perfect facade. She swallowed hard and sat down beside him, her face crumbling under the weight of his gaze. "Jonathan, it's not what you think," she started, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen, Adam. He's not just someone I met through work." Jonathan leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Then what is he, Emily? Because all I see is someone who's been lying to me for months, someone who's been keeping secrets. What's going on?" Emily took a deep breath, and for the first time, she looked like she might finally be ready to tell the truth. Her eyes met his, and he could see the vulnerability there, but also something else. A fear that maybe, just maybe, Jonathan wasn't going to forgive her this time. "Adam's not just a colleague, Jonathan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's someone I've been seeing for a while now. We've been together. I didn't want you to find out. I didn't know how to tell you." Jonathan's heart dropped. "Together as in..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The idea of Emily, the woman he had trusted with everything, being with someone else in such an intimate way, well, it shattered him. "I never meant for it to go this far," Emily continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "But somewhere along the way, I realized I was unhappy. And Adam, he made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't right. I know that now. But I couldn't stop." Jonathan's head was spinning. It felt like the world was collapsing around him. He had loved her. He had trusted her. And she had betrayed him, in the worst way possible. "Why didn't you tell me, Emily?" Jonathan asked, his voice cracking. "Why keep it from me? If you were unhappy, we could have worked through it. But this, This was a secret. A huge, huge secret. Emily bit her lip, her face filled with regret. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. But I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without destroying everything. The silence between them stretched out, thick and suffocating. Jonathan couldn't think, couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking. He had always believed that he and Emily were invincible, that nothing could tear them apart. But now, all he could feel was the bitter sting of betrayal. So what now? Jonathan asked, his voice so quiet it almost didn't sound like his own. What happens now, Emily? Do you go back to him? Her eyes widened. No, Jonathan, I don't want to be with him. I want you. I never stopped loving you. But Jonathan couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The trust had been shattered. What was left? What could they rebuild from this? The next few days were a blur. Emily tried to talk to him, to apologize, to make things right. But Jonathan couldn't look at her without seeing Adam. Every word out of her mouth felt like a lie. Finally, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. As Jonathan sat in the quiet of their shared apartment, staring at the shattered pieces of what once felt like a perfect life, he knew the time for decisions had come. The weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the affair, the betrayal, hung over him like a dark cloud. Emily had apologized, begged for forgiveness, but the sting of what she had done was too fresh, too painful. He felt as though a part of him had died with her confession. For the past few days, Jonathan had been trying to process it all, trying to figure out if he could find it in himself to forgive her, to rebuild what they once had. But each time he looked at her, all he could see was the image of her with Adam. The trust had been broken, and once that line is crossed, it's nearly impossible to return. Emily had become desperate. She called him at all hours, tried to convince him that their love could overcome this, that what they had was worth saving. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. He still didn't know everything. There were things that Emily was holding back, things that didn't add up. And as much as he wanted to believe her, he had learned the hard way that sometimes people aren't what they appear to be. One afternoon, as Jonathan was coming home from work, he saw Emily's phone on the kitchen counter. She had left it there, unattended. His pulse quickened. There was a part of him that told him to leave it alone. But the other part, the part that had been deceived, told him he had to know the whole truth. It was the only way he could move forward, one way or the other. With shaking hands, Jonathan picked up her phone. He didn't need to unlock it this time. The screen lit up with a message from Adam, and Jonathan's stomach churned. The message was simple. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I'll see you tonight. A pit formed in Jonathan's stomach. This wasn't over. Emily hadn't been honest with him. It was clear now. There was something deeper, something Jonathan had yet to uncover. The tension between Jonathan and Emily reached a boiling point. That night, Jonathan couldn't ignore the burning need for answers any longer. He had to confront her once and for all. Emily walked in, looking tired and disheveled from another late client meeting. The moment she stepped inside, Jonathan could see it in her eyes. Her usual charm, her confidence, was gone. It was replaced with guilt, and maybe even fear. She had been hiding something, and Jonathan knew it. It was time to confront her again. Emily, we need to talk, Jonathan said, his voice calm but determined. He wasn't angry. He wasn't screaming, but the firmness in his tone carried weight. It was a warning. She immediately looked uncomfortable, as though she knew what was coming. Not now, Jonathan, she said, her voice wavering. I'm tired, and I really don't think… No, Jonathan interrupted. We're doing this now. We're not putting it off anymore. She looked at him for a moment, searching his face as if looking for some hint that he might back down. But Jonathan had made up his mind. He wasn't going to allow her to manipulate him again. He threw the phone onto the table between them, face up, so she could see it. Her message to Adam stared back at her. Explain this, Jonathan said, his voice low and steady. What's going on, Emily? Emily's face went pale. For the first time since her confession, Jonathan saw her visibly shaken. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was at a loss. Finally, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I wasn't planning on this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I never wanted you to find out like this. Jonathan wasn't buying it. Then what was it? Emily. What was the point of all of this? His voice cracked as he spoke the words. He was trying so hard not to break down, but the hurt and confusion were too much. He had loved her, he had trusted her, and this was the price he had paid. Emily sat down, her face buried in her hands. It just happened, she said, her voice muffled. I got caught up in it, Adam. He made me feel things I hadn't felt in so long. Things I've been missing. Jonathan felt like he had been slapped. You used me, Emily. You used me to keep up the image you wanted, all while you were secretly with him. He stepped back, shaking his head. I was never enough for you, was I? I gave you everything, and you threw it away. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. That's not true, she pleaded, standing up. I still love you, Jonathan. I swear I do. But Jonathan couldn't take it anymore. The words, the lies, everything. His chest tightened, and he felt as if the air in the room had been sucked out. He stared at Emily, trying to find the person he had once known. But she was gone, replaced by a woman who had deceived him. And that person didn't deserve his forgiveness. I can't do this anymore, Emily, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, who doesn't care enough to be honest. It's over. Emily's face crumpled, her entire body shaking with the weight of his words. She took a step toward him, but Jonathan held his hand up, stopping her. No, he said firmly. Don't. Just don't. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and unshed tears. Jonathan had made his choice. The finality of it settled over him like a heavy blanket. There was no going back from this. He couldn't stay in this toxic relationship, where trust was a fragile illusion that had been shattered. But as Jonathan started to gather his things, ready to leave and start a new chapter in his life, Emily made a final plea. You don't know everything, she said, her voice frantic. There's more. There's something you need to understand. Jonathan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. What do you mean? What else is there? Emily hesitated, her eyes darting around as if she were searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke. Adam. He's not who you think he is. There's a reason we've been meeting in secret. He's been pressuring me. He's not just a client. He's someone dangerous. The words hit Jonathan like a cold wave. His thoughts raced as he tried to process what she was saying. Dangerous? What do you mean? Emily looked at him with wide eyes, her voice shaking. He's been blackmailing me. He has something on me, Jonathan. Something I didn't want you to find out about. Jonathan's mind was racing as he processed Emily's words. She wasn't just telling him about an affair, about some misguided romance. No, she was telling him that Adam wasn't just the man who had destroyed their relationship. He was also a threat. A threat that had been hanging over their lives like a dark cloud. Emily was being blackmailed, and Jonathan had been kept in the dark about it for far too long. Blackmailed? Jonathan repeated, his voice hoarse. His chest felt tight, and his head spun. What do you mean, Emily? What does he have on you? Emily's face crumpled, the weight of her confession pressing down on her. She had been holding this secret for so long, and now that the truth was spilling out, she looked like a woman who had been carrying the weight of the world. It's something from my past. Something I did that I'm not proud of. Adam found out about it, and he's been using it to control me. Jonathan's mind was racing. He couldn't understand it. Emily wasn't just a victim in all this. She had allowed herself to be manipulated, to be drawn into this mess, and now she was trying to make it sound like she had no choice. Was that true? Or was she just trying to salvage whatever she could of their relationship? Emily, I don't know what to believe anymore, Jonathan said, his voice trembling with emotion. He wasn't just angry now. He was devastated. All these months, the lies, the secrets, it was all too much. The woman he loved had hidden this from him, and now he was supposed to just accept it? I'm so sorry, Emily whispered, tears streaking down her face. She stepped closer to him, her hands trembling as she reached for him. Please, Jonathan, I didn't know what else to do. I thought I could handle it, but he's so manipulative, so controlling, I didn't know how to get out." Jonathan took a step back, raising his hands as if to distance himself from her. "You should have come to me. We could have worked through it, but you didn't tell me instead. You kept this from me, and now everything is falling apart." "I never wanted this," Emily said desperately. "I never wanted to hurt you." Jonathan shook his head, unable to look at her anymore. He couldn't comprehend how this had all spiraled so far out of control. He needed space. He needed time to process all of this, but Emily wouldn't give him that. She continued to beg, to plead, to try and salvage what was left of their fractured relationship. But Jonathan's heart had already been broken. "I can't do this," Jonathan said, his voice low, final. "I can't keep living like this. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The next few days were a blur of emotions for Jonathan. He stayed in the apartment, avoiding Emily as much as possible. Every time she tried to talk to him, he pushed her away, drowning in his own thoughts. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it all built up inside him, weighing him down until it felt like the world was crushing him. And yet, even though Emily had shattered his trust, Jonathan still couldn't ignore that gnawing feeling in his gut. He needed to know the full truth. If she had been blackmailed, there was more to the story, and he couldn't move forward without understanding the full picture. He wasn't going to be left in the dark any longer. One evening, when Emily had gone out again, Jonathan took it upon himself to dig deeper. He knew it was risky, that he was crossing a line, but he couldn't stop himself. He needed to know everything. He went to her desk, where she kept a stack of old papers and some files. It wasn't where she usually stored anything personal, but there was something about it that felt important. As he rifled through the drawers, Jonathan found something that made his heart stop. A set of old photographs, faded and yellowed with age. He looked at the pictures closely. They were of Emily, much younger, with a group of people he didn't recognize. In some, she looked happy, carefree, almost innocent. But in the others, there was a darkness in her eyes, a fear that hadn't been there before. One photo in particular caught his attention. It showed Emily with a man, someone much older than her, his hand resting a little too familiarly on her shoulder. Jonathan's heart sank. He didn't know who the man was, but the look on Emily's face in that photo sent a chill down his spine. He had to know more. Was this the secret that Adam was blackmailing her with? He quickly searched through the rest of the drawers and found more papers. Old documents, a letter addressed to someone named Greg Williams, and what appeared to be some kind of legal document. Jonathan scanned the letter, his mind racing as he pieced the details together. This wasn't just a random affair. This was something bigger. Emily had been involved in something criminal. Something that could destroy her life if anyone found out. The weight of it hit Jonathan hard. He had known her for years, and yet there were so many things he didn't know about her. And now, here he was, uncovering secrets he never thought he'd have to face. That night, when Emily returned, Jonathan was ready. He had the pieces now, the photographs, the documents, and he knew that Emily's confession was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been hiding something much darker, and it was time for her to come clean. "Emily," Jonathan said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk. You're not telling me everything. I found something." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with dread. She knew this wasn't just another conversation. This was the reckoning. Jonathan held up the letter, the photographs. "What is this?" he demanded. "What are you hiding from me? Who is this man, and why didn't you tell me about it?" Emily's face drained of color. For a moment, she was silent, unable to speak, and then, with a shaky breath, she finally answered. "His name is Greg Williams," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was someone I was involved with years ago. He got me into something I shouldn't have, something that's been haunting me ever since." As Emily stood there, trembling, the weight of her confession hanging in the air, Jonathan took a deep breath. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The last few days had felt like a whirlwind of deceit, betrayal, and confusion. But now, standing in front of him, Emily was finally telling him the full truth. "Greg Williams," Jonathan repeated, trying to piece together the pieces of the puzzle. "What do you mean? He got you into something?" His voice was tight, but there was a sense of clarity now. He needed to understand what was at stake, not just for her, but for them. Emily took a long, shaky breath and lowered her gaze to the floor. The years of secrets seemed to be weighing down on her all at once. "It's complicated, Jonathan. I was young, and Greg, he offered me something I thought I needed. He was involved in some shady business, and at the time, I didn't realize how dangerous it was. I got involved with him, with his business, and it turned into something I couldn't control." Jonathan's heart sank. He had never imagined that the woman he loved had been involved in something so dark, so dangerous. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he could have prepared for. "I know it's hard to understand," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "But I thought it was over. I thought Greg had moved on, and I had left that life behind. I never wanted to hurt you, Jonathan. But when Adam found out, he started threatening me. He knew everything about Greg, about what I had done, and he used it against me. He used it to manipulate me, to control me. That's why I couldn't tell you. I didn't want you to know who I really was." Jonathan closed his eyes, feeling a wave of both anger and sympathy. Emily had been a victim of her own choices, trapped by her past mistakes. But the fact that she had kept all of this from him, that she had lied and manipulated him for so long, was still hard to swallow. "You could have told me, Emily," Jonathan said quietly, his voice now tinged with exhaustion. "You could have come to me. I would have helped you, but you kept me in the dark all this time. I can't just forget that." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do now is tell you the truth and hope that you can understand why I did what I did." Jonathan's gaze softened slightly. He didn't know if he could ever trust her again, but part of him still cared for her, the woman he had once thought he would spend the rest of his life with. "I don't know what's next for us, Emily," Jonathan said slowly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I need time. I need time to figure out if I can forgive you, if I can ever trust you again. I can't make that decision now, not in the heat of the moment." Emily nodded, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her guilt. "I understand. I'll give you the space you need, but please, know that I'm truly sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." The next few weeks were a blur of emotions for Jonathan. He spent time away from Emily, trying to clear his head and decide what to do next. The apartment that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison, filled with reminders of all the lies. Jonathan knew that things couldn't go back to how they were before. But what came next? Was forgiveness possible? Could he rebuild what had been broken? He focused on his work, threw himself into his projects, and leaned on his friends for support. Slowly but surely, he began to regain a sense of who he was: independent, strong, and capable of making decisions for himself, without being dependent on the lies Emily had told him. But the process of healing wasn't easy. It wasn't linear. There were moments when Jonathan would catch himself thinking of Emily, remembering the good times, the laughter, the way she used to smile at him. And in those moments, he would wonder if he had made the right choice. Should he give her another chance? Could he live with the pain of her betrayal, knowing it had all been built on a lie? As he navigated these conflicting emotions, he also realized something else. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first discovered the truth. He had grown, he had learned, and above all, he had discovered his own strength. The person standing here now was no longer the naive man who believed in perfection. He was someone who had faced the hardest truths of his life and come out the other side, stronger and more resilient. Weeks later, Jonathan found himself sitting in a quiet cafe, the soft hum of the morning crowd surrounding him. Across from him sat Emily. She looked different now, more composed, more grounded. But there was still an air of sadness around her. Jonathan had agreed to meet with her, and as much as he had dreaded this moment, he knew it was necessary. "How are you?" Emily asked, her voice soft but sincere. Jonathan took a deep breath, staring at his coffee cup. "I've been better," he admitted, "but I'm getting there. It's been difficult, I won't lie about that." He met her gaze, his eyes tired but steady. "But I'm learning to move on, Emily. It's a long road, and I'm not sure where it ends, but I'm trying." Emily nodded, her lips trembling as if she were holding back tears. I understand I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, and I'm so sorry I don't expect forgiveness. I know I've lost you." Jonathan studied her for a moment. He had no illusions about what their relationship had been, and he knew it would never be the same again. But somehow, in this moment, he realized that he had come to terms with the fact that sometimes people change. Sometimes love fades, and sometimes you have to let go. "I can't go back, Emily," Jonathan said gently, "but I can move forward, and so can you. You have to let go of your past too. Stop letting it control you. You deserve to live freely, without fear." Emily wiped away a tear, her face a mixture of regret and relief. "I will, I promise. Thank you, Jonathan, for giving me the chance to explain, for letting me say goodbye properly." As Jonathan left the cafe that day, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The truth had come out. The wounds had been laid bare, and now it was time to heal. It was clear to him now. Forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it meant letting go. Letting go of the past, of the hurt, and of the idea that things could go back to how they were. Jonathan had learned to live for himself, and that, in itself, was the greatest lesson of all. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this journey with Jonathan and Emily. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. You won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. See you in the next video.